The rusted silhouette of the warplane stood like a forgotten monument at the edge of the overgrown airfield. Its fuselage was eaten through by decades of rain and wind, its paint peeled away in flakes of dull grey and faded green. Grass crept up through the cracks in the tarmac, swallowing what remained of the once bustling runway. For most, it was just a relic, an eyesore abandoned after the war. But for one man, it was home. James Callahan, a veteran in his late 40s, had been living in a shack not far from the plane for nearly a decade. Life had stripped him down to the bare bones of survival. He wore his past on his face, scars etched into weathered skin, creases carved by years of hardship. His broad shoulders were still strong, but his gait carried the weight of invisible battles. No family, no friends, no steady work. Just James and Max. Max, a German shepherd with a thick sable coat, was more than just a dog. He was James's lifeline. Loyal, sharp-eyed and protective, the animal rarely left his side. The two were inseparable, a silent brotherhood formed out of mutual need. When the world had turned its back on James, Max had been there reminding him that he wasn't completely alone. The shack they called home wasn't much, a lean-to built from corrugated metal and scavenged wood, patched together with tarps that flapped in the wind. The nights were bitterly cold, the summers unbearably hot, but James never complained. After everything he had seen overseas, after the chaos, the noise, the loss, quiet was its own kind of mercy. Yet the quiet never lasted, not entirely. Every day James would catch himself staring at the warplane, its nose tilted downward as though bowing in defeat. It was an old fighter bomber, long decommissioned and stripped of parts. Children who dared sneak into the airfield at night would tell ghost stories about it, whispering that the pilot never left. Adults dismissed it as nonsense. To James, though, the plane was something different. It was a reminder. The plane was a mirror of himself, battered, rusted, forgotten by the world that once needed it desperately. A machine that had been left behind, just as he had. Still, he couldn't shake the strange pull it had on him. Sometimes at dusk, when the light bled across the horizon in shades of blood red and amber, he thought he saw movement in its shadow. A flicker of something that didn't belong. The sound of metal groaning in the wind. The scrape of something shifting beneath the ground. He would dismiss it as his imagination, or perhaps the whiskey he rationed in a bottle to fight the cold. But Max never dismissed it. The dog would stand stiff-legged near the plane, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the ground beside its wing. He would growl, low and steady whenever they walked too close. James would tug him away, shaking his head. "It's just an old plane, boy," he'd mutter. "A piece of junk, nothing more." But deep down, the words never settled right. James's daily routine was simple. He scavenged scrap from nearby junkyards, sometimes trading it for food or spare change. At night, he returned to the shack, fed Max, and sat by the small fire pit he had dug out of the earth. He would listen to the crackle of burning wood, stare at the stars, and let the silence press against him. But even in silence, the past never let go. Some nights he would dream of sand and gunfire, of the faces of brothers who never came home. He would wake in a cold sweat, his fists clenched, Max nudging him with a reassuring whine. Those nights, the warplane seemed to loom larger, its hollow cockpit glass catching the moonlight like a watchful eye. James wasn't the only one who noticed. The locals kept their distance, but every so often a stranger would wander by. Tourists with cameras, urban explorers chasing adventure, or even government surveyors looking at the old land. They'd snap pictures of the plane, joke about its decay, and leave. James never bothered them, and they never bothered him. But every so often someone lingered, watching, taking notes. James would feel their eyes on him, even when they said nothing. His instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive overseas, always whispered the same warning. They were not here for you. They're here for it, the warplane. One evening, as the sun dipped low, James sat with Max by the fire. The dog's ears twitched, his head turning sharply toward the airfield. James followed his gaze. The warplane stood as it always had, silent, lifeless, a skeleton of metal and rust. But Max wouldn't look away. He rose, padded toward it, then barked once, sharp and urgent. James frowned, pulling his jacket tighter. "Not tonight, boy. Leave it." But Max barked again, louder this time, then growled deep in his chest. He trotted toward the plane, nose pressed low to the ground, stopping near the wing. His paws scraped at the dirt, claws digging furiously. James cursed under his breath and followed. Max! Enough! But when he reached the spot, he froze. There, in the fading light, he saw it. The faint outline of metal, half buried beneath the earth. A perfect rectangle. Too perfect to be natural. He crouched down, brushing dirt away with his hands. His fingers scraped cold steel. A hatch. Max barked again, tail stiff, as though urging him on. James sat back on his heels, heart thudding. He glanced at the warplane towering above, its shadow stretching long across the ground. The hatch didn't belong to the plane's structure. It was something else, hidden deliberately beneath it. His gut clenched with a soldier's instinct. Whatever this was, it wasn't supposed to be found. And yet, it was right there, waiting. James stared at the hatch as the sky darkened, the airfield falling silent except for the whisper of wind through the grass. He reached out once more, his hand lingering on the cold steel. Max sat beside him watching, ears perked as though he too understood. That night, James couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the hatch burned in his mind like a beacon. His instinct screamed at him to leave it buried. But another part of him, the part that had lost everything, the part that had nothing left to risk, whispered something different. Maybe, just maybe, there was a reason he had been the one to find it. And maybe, just maybe, opening it would change everything. The next morning, James woke with a knot in his stomach. The hatch still gnawed at his thoughts. He had faced firefights, ambushes, and bomb-laced roads overseas without flinching. But something about that rectangle of steel buried beneath the wing of a forgotten warplane made him uneasy. Max, however, seemed restless with anticipation. He paced near the shack, ears pricked toward the plane, occasionally giving a sharp bark as if to remind James of what lay waiting. "All right," James muttered, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. "We'll look. But just look." He grabbed a crowbar he used for salvaging scrap, slung an old flashlight into his pocket, and walked with Max across the cracked tarmac. The air was cool, the kind that bit at the lungs, and the warplane loomed in the grey morning light like a sentinel. When he reached the hatch, the dirt he had cleared last night was still brushed aside, revealing the faint seams of the rectangle. James crouched, running his hands over the edges. It was no maintenance panel, no part of the warplane's design. It was embedded in the ground itself, independent of the fuselage. He wedged the crowbar into the seam and leaned with his weight. The metal didn't budge. He tried again, grunting with effort. Nothing. It was sealed tight, as though welded shut, or locked from the inside. Max stood close, tail stiff, nose almost pressed to the ground. Every so often he let out a soft whine. "You smell something, boy?" James asked, wiping sweat from his brow. The question was rhetorical, but the dog's ears flicked, and he gave a low bark, insistent. James straightened, scanning the surroundings. The airfield stretched wide and empty, grass swaying in the breeze, the control tower a hollow shell in the distance. No one was around, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That sensation wasn't new to him. He had felt it too many times overseas, moments before an ambush, or when crossing into enemy-held territory. But this was Montana, a forgotten patch of nowhere. There shouldn't have been eyes on him here. Still, instinct was instinct. He pocketed the flashlight, muttered "later," and tugged Max back toward the shack. All day he tried to push it out of his mind. He scavenged in town, traded scrap for canned food, and returned as the sun dipped low. But the image of that hatch clung to him like a burr. By nightfall he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to sleep until he tried again. With a lantern in one hand and the crowbar in the other, James returned to the warplane. Max padded silently at his side, eyes sharp, ears swiveling at every sound. The hatch gleamed faintly under the lantern's glow. James knelt, braced himself and shoved the crowbar deep into the seam. He pulled hard, muscles straining, sweat running down his temples. With a groan, the metal shifted, just barely, but enough to prove it could move. Adrenaline surged. He repositioned the bar, pushed again. This time the hatch scraped open a few inches, releasing a gust of stale air that carried a metallic tang. Max barked once, sharp, then fell silent. His nose twitched as he sniffed at the opening. James aimed the lantern toward the gap. A staircase descended into blackness, swallowed by shadows that even the light couldn't pierce. The air was damp and cool, with the faint, musty scent of concrete. "What the hell is this?" James whispered. His pulse quickened. Hidden beneath a rusted warplane, in the middle of a forgotten airfield, was a sealed underground chamber. Not a storm drain, not an old storage pit. Something deliberate. Max leaned forward, as if ready to go first. James held him back. "Easy, boy. We don't know what's down there." He stared into the opening, torn between dread and curiosity. Every instinct screamed at him to close the hatch and forget it. But another voice, quieter yet undeniable, whispered that he had stumbled onto something monumental, something people had wanted buried, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt certain. This wasn't an accident. He had been meant to find it. The lantern's flame flickered as James leaned closer to the opening. The staircase stretched downward, steep and narrow, carved into concrete that looked too clean to have been left to rot for decades. Dust coated the first few steps, but below that the surface was strangely undisturbed, as though no one had touched it in years, or perhaps as though someone still maintained it. James swallowed hard. "Well, Max, guess we're not sleeping tonight." Max gave a low whine, half eagerness, half caution, before inching closer. His nails scraped against the metal rim as he peered into the shadows. His tail twitched once, then stiffened, his body tense but ready. James hooked the lantern on his belt, gripping the crowbar in one hand, and set his boots on the first step. The concrete groaned faintly under his weight. With each slow movement he listened, every muscle taut. He had cleared compounds in Afghanistan, stormed rooms with only seconds to react. This silence and stillness felt more unnerving than combat. The air cooled as they descended, thick with the scent of damp stone and rust. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell of old machinery became, metallic and stale like the breath of a forgotten factory. About 20 steps down, the walls changed. The rough concrete gave way to smooth steel panels riveted together, their surfaces dulled by time but unmistakably precise. He brushed his hand over one, muttering, "This wasn't built by some farmer with a shovel." Max's claws clicked softly against the steps, his breathing steady but alert. At one point he froze, ears swiveling, body rigid. James stopped too, heart hammering. For a moment he thought he heard it, a faint hum impossibly deep within the walls. But when he held his breath, the sound vanished. "Paranoia," he whispered, though even he didn't believe it. Finally, the staircase opened into a small landing. A heavy steel door stood before them, its surface scarred with age. A wheel-shaped handle protruded from the center, streaked with rust. The lantern's light shimmered faintly against it. James studied it carefully. The design reminded him of submarine bulkhead doors, airtight, designed to seal something in, or keep something out. Max sniffed at the bottom, tail low, then stepped back with a huff, as if warning against going further. James hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back, climb the stairs, reseal the hatch, and forget any of this existed. But another part of him, the soldier, the survivor, the man who had spent years asking why me, demanded answers. He gripped the wheel handle, muscles straining as he twisted. It resisted at first, stiff from decades of disuse. Then, with a loud metallic groan, it shifted, and the door creaked open an inch. A gush of stale, cold air rushed out, so sharp it extinguished the lantern's flame. Darkness swallowed them whole. James cursed under his breath, fumbling to relight the lantern with trembling hands. Sparks flared, then caught, bathing the room beyond in dim orange light. He stepped inside. The chamber stretched wide, far larger than he expected. Rows of steel crates lined the walls, each marked with faded, stenciled numbers. Pipes and conduits ran overhead, dripping occasionally into puddles that mirrored the lantern's glow. The air carried that same metallic tang, but beneath it, faintly, was something else. Oil, fuel, machinery. Max padded forward, nose to the ground. His movements grew sharper, more urgent. Suddenly, He stopped near a large crate and growled low, hackles rising. James swung the lantern toward it. The crate wasn't sealed. Its lid sat slightly ajar. He approached slowly, crowbar ready. With a grunt, he shoved the lid open. Inside, layered in old tarps, was a stack of military gear. Helmets, ration tins, rusted rifles. Not unusual for a forgotten airfield, maybe. But at the bottom gleamed something else. A case with a keypad lock, pristine despite the dust. James stared at it, heart pounding. The numbers were still visible, faint but legible. He touched the keypad, and nearly jumped when it beeped faintly, a sound far too alive for something that should have been dead for decades. Max barked sharply, startling the silence. James froze. Somewhere deep in the chamber beyond the lantern's reach came an answering sound. Not a bark, not machinery, a metallic clang, the echo of movement. Someone, or something, was down there with them. The metallic clang reverberated across the chamber, rolling through the air like thunder trapped underground. James froze, lantern trembling in his hand. His other fist tightened around the crowbar, knuckles white. Max growled, teeth bared, body pressed low to the ground. The fur along his spine bristled like wire bristles, every instinct screaming danger. James forced himself to breathe slow. "Easy, boy. Easy." But his voice quivered, betraying the dread prickling at the back of his neck. The sound had come from somewhere beyond the rows of crates. Not just a trick of the pipes, not just echoes of settling steel. It had been deliberate, heavy, metallic, purposeful. James angled the lantern forward. Its dim glow stretched into the maze of shadows, illuminating only a few feet at a time. Beyond that, blackness pressed in, thick and suffocating. Another sound followed, a scrape, like metal dragging against concrete. James's pulse hammered. He crouched slightly, adopting the same stance he had in war zones, balanced, steady, every muscle primed to spring. He knew what it meant when an enemy let you hear them. It was no accident. It was a warning. Max barked once, sharp and loud, his voice ricocheting off the steel walls. Silence answered, heavy, suffocating silence. James edged toward the nearest row of crates. The lantern's flame flickered against faded stencils. USAF property, classified. Some crates were sealed tight, others half open with rusted lids. His gaze kept darting into the shadows, expecting something to lunge. He rounded the corner, lantern lifted high. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing, just endless rows of forgotten steel. Then his light caught movement. A figure. It flickered in the glow. A silhouette, humanoid but wrong, too still, too rigid. It stood at the far end of the row, half in shadow. Its outline gleamed faintly, as if made of metal rather than flesh. James blinked, heart seizing. Was it a trick of the light? A statue? A mannequin? He stepped closer, cautiously. Max stayed at his heel, growling. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. James raised the lantern higher, and the light spilled across its surface. Not a man. A machine. A humanoid frame stood bolted to the floor, its body plated in dull steel. Wires and tubes coiled from its chest into the wall behind it. Its face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, only a smooth curve of metal with faint etchings like circuitry beneath the skin. James exhaled sharply, relief and dread clashing in his chest. Just a machine. Old military tech, maybe. Some kind of experimental project abandoned with the base. But then the eyes flickered. Twin pinpricks of light glowed faintly behind the smooth surface. James stumbled back, lantern rattling. No, no way. The machine shuddered. A hiss of pressure released from its chest. Slowly, the cables uncoiled, dropping one by one onto the floor with metallic thuds. Its arms twitched. Max barked furiously, lunging forward. Back! James yanked him by the collar. His pulse roared in his ears. Every rational thought screamed to run. But another instinct, curiosity, the soldier's need to know the enemy, anchored him in place. The machine raised its head. For the first time, James felt its gaze, though the face was featureless. It looked at him. No, through him. Then, with a grinding scrape, it took a step. James staggered back. Jesus! The machine's voice came, not from a mouth but from the chamber itself. a deep, distorted resonance that vibrated through the steel walls. Identity. Unknown. Clearance. Denied. The lantern flickered violently, as if the air itself shivered. James raised the crowbar instinctively. "Stay back!" The machine didn't obey. Its lights grew brighter, its frame unfolding as hidden joints unlocked. Once bolted in place, it now stood free, towering, its limbs moving with unnatural precision. Max barked again, but this time James didn't hold him back. The dog lunged, teeth snapping. The machine's arm swung fast, too fast, and struck the ground near Max, sending sparks flying. Max dodged, skidding across the concrete, growling louder. James didn't think. He charged forward, crowbar raised, and brought it down against the machine's chest. The impact rang out like striking solid iron, vibrating up his arms and nearly dislocating his shoulder. The machine didn't flinch. It only tilted its head, as though assessing him. Hostile response. Logged. The lights in its chest flared. Somewhere deep in the chamber, a hidden generator roared to life, shaking the walls. The entire underground facility seemed to awaken with it. James's blood ran cold. Whatever this place was, it wasn't abandoned, and he had just reactivated something that was never meant to be found. The underground chamber trembled as the generator rumbled alive, dust shaking loose from overhead beams. Sparks spat from ancient cables, illuminating the walls in strobing flashes of blue. James staggered back, chest heaving, crowbar slippery in his grip. The machine's glowing eyes tracked his every move, cold and unyielding. Max circled, growling, his claws scraping concrete. James's training screamed one word: escape. This wasn't a battlefield, he understood. No maps, no chain of command, no comrades at his side. Just him, his dog, and something pulled from a nightmare. But another voice whispered inside his head, "If you run now, you'll never know what's down here. You'll never know what they buried." The machine took another step forward, its heavy footfall ringing like a hammer strike. James raised his lantern and crowbar. "I don't know what the hell you are," he said through gritted teeth, "but you're not stopping me." The machine's chest plates hissed open, revealing a core of glowing circuitry. The light painted the chamber in sickly green. Non-compliant subject, threat level elevated. It raised an arm. A pulse of static surged through the air, and James's lantern flickered wildly before extinguishing altogether. Darkness swallowed him. "Max, move!" James shouted. He dropped the lantern and dove aside just as a blast of energy seared past him, striking the wall. Steel warped and cracked under the force, molten edges glowing red. The dog darted around the machine, barking, trying to distract it. James scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. The crowbar suddenly felt like a child's toy against something built of steel and fire. Still, he gripped it tighter. The machine turned toward Max, lights pulsing brighter. "No!" James roared. He hurled the crowbar with all his strength. It spun through the air and struck the machine's head with a metallic clang. The impact didn't damage it, but it did redirect its attention. The machine swung back toward James. James darted between crates, weaving through the narrow aisles. He needed a weapon, something real. His boots splashed through puddles of condensation, his lungs burning. Behind him, heavy footfalls followed with relentless rhythm. "Think, James. Think." He rounded a corner and froze. There, among the dusty rows, a crate sat open. Inside, beneath moth-eaten canvas, glimmered rifles. Old models, but military grade. He grabbed one, checked the chamber. Empty. He cursed and rifled through the crate. No ammo. The machine's shadow loomed at the edge of the row. James's eyes darted to another crate marked munitions. He lunged, pried it open with raw hands and grinned grimly. Rows of ammo boxes gleamed back. He jammed rounds into the rifle, each click loud as gunfire in the silence. Max barked, buying him seconds. The machine stepped into view, its chest glowing hotter, energy humming. James leveled the rifle. "Let's see how tough you are." He squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, muzzle flash lighting the chamber like lightning. Bullets ripped into the machine's chest, sparking on impact. Some ricocheted, whining off the steel walls. The machine staggered but didn't fall. Its lights flickered and it let out a distorted hiss. Damage detected. Engaging countermeasures. Panels along its arms slid open, revealing mechanisms that whirred to life. James's stomach dropped. He fired again, round after round, but the machine advanced, shrugging off the hits like raindrops. Max lunged from the side, clamping his jaws around exposed wiring near the machine's leg. Sparks burst. The machine stumbled, crashing against a crate. James seized the opening. He aimed for the core, the glowing circuitry in its chest, and unleashed the last of his rounds. The bullets punched through, embedding deep. The light inside flickered violently. The machine let out a deafening mechanical roar, then collapsed onto one knee. The chamber fell into tense silence, broken only by James's ragged breathing. Smoke rose from the machine's chest. Its lights dimmed to a faint glow. James lowered the rifle slowly, shoulders trembling. He knew better than to assume it was finished. Machines didn't bleed out. They rebooted. But as he stepped closer, he saw something strange. Behind the shattered plating, tucked deep in its chest, wasn't just circuitry. It was a symbol. A military insignia. One James hadn't seen in years. One tied to secret units whispered about, but never confirmed. Max whined, ears pinned back. James stared at the symbol, realization chilling him to the bone. This wasn't just an old experiment. This was part of something bigger, something buried, something they never wanted him or anyone to find. And if one machine had woken up, there might be more. The smoke from the broken machine lingered in the chamber, acrid and metallic. James pressed his back to a wall, rifle hanging slack in his hands, pulse still hammering from the firefight. Max limped to his side, fur singed, panting hard. James crouched and checked the dog's leg. "You're tough, Max," he muttered, rubbing behind the ear that was still standing proud. The shepherd licked his hand, as if to say, "We're not done yet." The dim glow of the ruined machine cast eerie shadows across the crates. James's eyes kept drifting to the insignia buried in its chest. The eagle and sword emblem was unmistakable. It belonged to a division whispered about even in Ranger briefings, Project Revenant. He'd always thought it was rumor, an experimental branch that blurred the line between soldier and machine. If this wreck was proof, then the rumors hadn't just been true. They had been buried for a reason. A sudden crack echoed above. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. James froze. Max's ears pricked. Then came another sound. Boots. Dozens of them. Heavy, disciplined, closing in from above. James swore under his breath. He'd fired rounds, made noise, someone had heard. He killed his lantern and crouched low. The hum of radios and clipped voices filtered down through the rusted hatch. "Unit Bravo, seal the perimeter. No one in or out." "Copy that. Dogs are moving in." James's throat tightened. They weren't here by accident. Someone had been monitoring this place all along. He looked at Max. The dog tilted his head, silent but alert. "Guess we're not the only ones hunting tonight." The hatch above clanged open. Floodlights pierced the darkness. A rope ladder dropped, followed by the unmistakable silhouette of armed soldiers in matte black gear. Their rifles swept the chamber in precise arcs. James ducked behind a crate, pulling Max close. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "Clear the left flank," one soldier barked. Boots thundered closer. James scanned the chamber for exits. The tunnel where the machine had come from yawned like a throat in the far wall. He could risk it, but if more of those things were down there, he'd be walking into hell. "Contact," another soldier called out, spotting the ruined machine. Their floodlights locked onto its body. "Revenant unit down. Mark it. Command will want confirmation." James's stomach flipped. They weren't surprised. They expected to find one of these things here. One soldier stepped closer to the broken unit, kneeling to inspect the insignia. His voice dropped, tight with unease. "This one's compromised. Subject terminated." "Good," another answered. "Last thing we need is another runaway." James's grip tightened on the rifle. Another runaway? So this wasn't the only one. Max growled low in his throat. James hushed him with a hand, but knew they couldn't stay hidden long. The soldiers were sweeping in a grid. Within minutes, they'd reach his corner. He made his choice. James yanked a smoke grenade from a crate. It was old, but likely functional. He pulled the pin and lobbed it into the open chamber. The device hissed, belching thick clouds of gray. Shouts rang out. Floodlights danced wildly as soldiers scrambled. "Contact! Move! James seized Max by the collar and sprinted toward the tunnel. Bullets pinged against steel. He ducked low, dragging his dog with him, and dove into the shadows beyond. The tunnel stretched downward, damp air clinging to his skin. Behind him, soldiers' voices echoed. "He's moving into Sector C. Cut him off." James ran harder. His boots slapped stone. His lungs burned. Max kept pace, ears flat, eyes burning with determination. They rounded a bend and froze. Ahead, a row of dark shapes stood against the wall, silhouettes of men. But as James lifted his rifle, his gut twisted. They weren't men. They were more machines. Dozens of them. Tall, broad-shouldered, armored like the one he just fought, but silent, inert, waiting. Max whined, pouring backward. James's breath hitched. He didn't know whether to fear the soldiers behind him more, or the sleeping giants ahead. A voice crackled from the soldiers' radios, faint but clear. "Activate Sector C, don't let him escape." James felt the floor vibrate beneath his boots. One of the machines stirred, its chest beginning to glow. The Watchers weren't just chasing him. They were waking the army buried in this tomb. The hum deepened, a low vibration that made James's teeth ache. Dust fell from the ceiling as the dormant figures began to stir. Their armor plates hissed and shifted, hydraulic joints clicking like bones after a long sleep. Max pressed against James's leg, growling low but steady. His hackles stood on end, but he didn't bark. He knew this wasn't prey or man. This was something other. Behind James, the soldiers' boots thundered down the tunnel. Their shouts grew louder. "Sector C is active. Hold fire until confirmation." "Negative. They're waking. Engage on sight." James's instincts screamed. The machines weren't waking randomly. They were being activated. The first giant's head tilted upward, a faint red glow burning behind its faceplate. Its chest pulsed with the same eerie light. Slowly, it stepped forward. The ground trembled with the weight. James backed against the tunnel wall, rifle raised but useless against an army. His eyes darted between the advancing machine and the flood of soldiers rounding the corner behind him. "Down! On the ground!" one soldier barked, rifle leveled at him. James ignored him. The machine took another heavy step, servo motors whining. Its head swiveled, first to the soldiers, then to James. And then the chaos detonated. The soldiers opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the tunnel like a strobe. Bullets pinged off the machine's armor, sparking harmlessly. The creature roared, not a human sound, but a metallic, reverberating bellow that shook James to the bone. The machine lunged into the squad. Its massive arms swung like a wrecking ball, sending two soldiers crashing against the wall. The tunnel filled with screams, gunfire, and the metallic shriek of hydraulics. James didn't wait. He grabbed Max's collar and darted along the wall, slipping past the chaos. The soldiers were too busy fighting their own nightmare to care about him now. But as he ran deeper into the tunnel, more red glows flickered to life. One by one, the dormant giants awakened, their armor plates shifting, eyes igniting like embers. Max barked sharply this time, the sound bouncing through the stone. James skidded to a halt, heart pounding. Ahead of him, four more of the machines stirred, cutting off the path forward. They were trapped. James spun, searching for any gap, any escape. His flashlight beam swept the wall and caught on a narrow fissure, half hidden by rubble. "Move, Max!" James shoved aside loose stone and squeezed into the gap. Max followed, claws scrabbling against the rock. The tunnel they entered was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders, but it led down, twisting away from the battlefield. Behind them, the sounds of carnage raged. The soldiers' gunfire grew frantic. One machine roared, followed by an explosion that rattled the stone under James's hands. He forced himself forward, scraping his arms raw against jagged rock. Max pressed close, tail low, panting hard. Finally, the passage widened into a circular shaft. Rusted metal rungs clung to the wall, disappearing into blackness above and below. James aimed his light down, only to see the rungs vanish into a pool of still, dark water. He looked up. The ladder stretched into shadow. Somewhere above, faint beams of daylight filtered through cracks. James glanced at Max. The shepherd's chest heaved, eyes reflecting the beam of the flashlight. Up we go. James muttered, slinging the rifle over his back. He began to climb, one hand gripping cold, rusted iron after another. Max whined below, uncertain. James paused, heart pounding. He couldn't leave him. "Come on, boy," he urged, climbing back down. He looped his belt under Max's chest like a harness, bracing his legs against the ladder. With a grunt, he lifted. Max squirmed, claws scraping. But James pulled with every ounce of strength he had left, hauling the dog upward step by step. Above them, faint tremors shook the shaft as if the world itself was at war. At last James shoved at a rusted grate. It resisted, then gave with a shriek of tearing metal. Fresh air hit his face like a blessing. He pushed Max through first, then hauled himself into the light. They emerged into a forgotten service yard overgrown with weeds, rusted train tracks stretching into the horizon. The city's skyline shimmered in the distance. James collapsed to his knees, gasping. Max licked his face, tail wagging weakly. They had escaped the tomb. But the fight he had witnessed below would not stay buried. Somewhere under the ground, an army of steel giants had awakened, and the world above had no idea what was coming. The sun felt alien after hours in the tunnels. James squinted, his lungs burning as he inhaled clean air. Max sat beside him, ears still flicking at every distant sound, body tense. The shepherd wasn't convinced they were safe. Neither was James. The rail yard was a graveyard of machines. Rusted train cars sat broken on the tracks, vines climbing their sides. Silence pressed heavy, as if the world had long forgotten this place. But James hadn't forgotten the sounds below, the metallic roars, the soldiers' screams, the thunder of war machines awakening. Those echoes clung to him like smoke. Max gave a low growl, swiveling toward the far end of the yard. James froze. Through the tall weeds, a figure emerged, an older man in a grey coat, hunched but deliberate in his stride. His face was shadowed beneath a cap, but his eyes gleamed sharp as a blade. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, voice rough as gravel. James's hand drifted toward his rifle. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He glanced toward the cracked pavement beneath their feet. "You saw it, didn't you? The hatch. The sleepers." James's chest tightened. This stranger knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," James lied. The man smiled thinly. "I've watched that yard for 20 years, waiting, guarding, hoping they'd stay asleep. But now it's too late." James gripped his rifle. "Then help me. Tell me what's happening down there." The man studied him for a long moment, then crouched to scratch Max's ear. The shepherd sniffed warily but didn't pull back. "They weren't built by us," the man said finally. "That ship out there, the warplane you've been sleeping beside, it wasn't just a relic. It was a warning, planted in plain sight, a scar left behind after the last time they woke." James felt cold seep into his bones. "You're saying this happened before?" The man nodded once. "And every time, we bury it deeper, pretend it never happened. But the earth doesn't forget. Neither do they." A sudden crack of branches spun them both around. Soldiers fanned into the yard, rifles raised, visors gleaming under the sun. Their leader barked orders. "There, secure them both." James raised his rifle, but the older man grabbed his arm. "Not here, not now. You'll get us both killed." Max barked, hackles raised. The soldiers advanced in tight formation, weapons leveled. James's mind raced. He couldn't fight a platoon. He couldn't run back underground either, not with the machines awake. The old man leaned close, whispering fast. "There's another way out. South end of the yard, collapsed tunnel. Follow it, trust the dog." Before James could answer, the man shoved him backward into the weeds. The soldiers surged. "Hands up, now!" James ducked low, grabbing Max's collar. Together they crawled through the weeds, keeping low as the old man raised his hands, drawing the soldiers' attention. "I'm unarmed," the stranger said, his voice carrying steady. "Take me." James didn't look back. Heart hammering, he sprinted with Max toward the southern tracks. Bullets cracked the air. Dirt spat at his feet. They tumbled into a collapsed section of concrete where rusted rebar jutted like bones. Max squeezed through first, then James crawled after, gravel tearing his palms. Behind him, soldiers shouted, but the tunnel's shadows swallowed them whole, masking their escape. James collapsed on the other side, chest heaving. Max pressed close, his body quivering with adrenaline. The old man's words gnawed at James's mind. They weren't built by us. Every time, we bury it deeper. Trust the dog. James stared into the dark passage ahead. He had no idea where it led, but the choice was gone. Whatever war was coming, he and Max were already in it, and this time there might be no burying the truth. The tunnel sloped downward, air growing colder, damper, each step echoing like a drumbeat. James steadied himself against the wall, Max padding close at his side, nose twitching, ears alert. The shepherd seemed to know this wasn't an ordinary escape route. It was leading them deeper, not out. The light behind them faded until they were swallowed by black. James fumbled with his flashlight, flicking it on. The beam cut across rough concrete, jagged edges where the collapse had split the passage. Water dripped steadily, pooling in shallow trenches. Max growled low, his hackles bristling. James crouched, running a hand over his fur. "Easy, boy, we don't have a choice." The words echoed hollow in the tunnel. For minutes they pressed forward, the silence broken only by James' S breathing and Max S claws clicking softly against the floor. Then, without warning, the tunnel widened. James stepped into a cavernous chamber, his flashlight beam disappearing into vast shadows above. The walls were lined with thick cables, some ancient and frayed, others pulsing faintly with blue light, as if alive. Max whimpered, ears flattening. James turned slowly, sweeping the beam across the room. Rows of metallic forms loomed in the dark. At first, he thought they were statues, soldiers frozen in parade stance. But then the light caught the curve of steel jaws, segmented limbs, plated torsos. Machines, dozens of them. They stood in silence, heads bowed, as if waiting for orders. Dust coated their frames, but beneath the grime, James could see faint symbols etched into their armor, sigils that weren't human. James's throat went dry. What the hell is this? Before he could step closer, a sharp hiss split the air. One of the machines shifted. Slowly, mechanically, its head rose. Twin red lights flared where eyes should have been. Max barked, the sound explosive in the chamber. Another machine stirred, then another. Across the chamber, heads lifted, lights flickering to life one by one, a forest of glowing eyes piercing the dark. James's instincts screamed at him to run. He yanked Max's collar, backing toward the tunnel. But the ground trembled. A heavy clang rang out as the nearest machine stepped forward, its limbs unfolding with unnatural precision. Suddenly, speakers crackled above. A voice boomed, distorted, metallic but laced with something almost human. Unauthorized presence detected. Identify. James froze, flashlight beam shaking, his voice rasped. I'm no threat, just passing through. Silence. Then, biological signature recognized. Soldier classification. Obsolete. Function. Expendable. The machine stirred faster now, shoulders rising, weapons forming out of their arms as though grown, not built. James's pulse thundered. He dragged Max back, but the shepherd resisted, barking at the advancing forms. The machine's steps shook the chamber like marching drums. Then, sudden chaos. A blast ripped through the far wall, shaking the cavern. Dust rained down. From the smoke, soldiers stormed in. Human soldiers this time, helmets glowing, rifles blazing. Suppress them! Lock them down! Bullets pinged against steel, sparks flying. The machines turned, some dropping into defensive stances, others powering forward with inhuman speed. The chamber erupted into war. James ducked behind a pillar. Max pressed to his side. Fire screamed across the room. Gunfire, energy bolts, the metallic roar of machines waking from slumber. One soldier spotted him. "You! Out now!" "You don't belong here." James shook his head. "I'm not leaving my dog." Before the soldier could respond, a machine lunged, its bladed arm tearing through the man's chestplate. Blood sprayed. The soldier crumpled. James swallowed bile. This wasn't a fight he could survive. Max barked again, pulling at James's sleeve, tugging him toward a smaller passage half hidden in the rubble. Somehow, the dog knew the only way out. James hesitated one last moment, staring at the carnage, humans and machines tearing each other apart. ancient secrets waking into nightmare. Then he ran. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Behind them, the chamber thundered with death. Screams cut short, metal tore, explosions rocked the walls. James stumbled forward, flashlight swinging wildly. Max led with determination, never faltering. Finally, they burst into another chamber, smaller, quieter, but no less terrifying. In its center stood something different from the machines in the first chamber, a pod. It gleamed with unnatural metal, seamless and alive. Strange markings glowed across its surface, shifting as though aware of their presence. James froze, breath shallow. The pod pulsed faintly like a beating heart. Max whimpered, tail low, but didn't retreat. He stood firm, eyes locked on the pod. James whispered, "What the hell did you find, boy?" The pod answered. A seam split down the middle, light spilling out in a blinding arc. Something inside was waking. The chamber pulsed with eerie light, shadows flickering across the curved walls. James shielded his eyes as the pod split further, its glowing seam widening until it yawned open like a mouth. A hiss of pressurized air rushed out, carrying a metallic tang that made his throat tighten. Max growled but didn't retreat. The dog's hackles stood tall, yet he kept his stance between James and the pod, unwavering, protective. Then, the light dimmed, revealing what lay inside. At first, James thought it was a man. A figure stood within the pod, tall, draped in a suit of armor that shimmered between steel and something organic. Its face was covered by a helmet, but as the chamber's glow touched it, the helmet dissolved into nothing. The figure's eyes opened. They weren't human. They glowed faint gold, with shifting patterns swirling inside, like storms trapped in glass. James stumbled backward, pulse racing. "What are you?" The figure stepped out, the floor humming beneath its weight. When it spoke, the voice was layered, deep and resonant, but threaded with something mechanical. "I am the Sentinel, the last guardian of what was buried here." James's mouth went dry. "Guardian of... what?" The figure's gaze swept over him, then to Max, who hadn't moved an inch. The Sentinel tilted its head slightly, almost curious. "Your kind built machines without understanding their origin. They are fragments of us, of the war we fought long before your world knew war. This place was hidden to contain them. The hatch your dog uncovered was not meant to be found." James's stomach sank. The machines, the glowing cables, the dormant army, it all made sense now. They weren't human creations. They were remnants of something older, alien. And now because of him they'd been awakened. But why keep it under a warplane? Why not destroy it? The Sentinel's eyes dimmed slightly, as if the weight of memory pressed against them. Because destruction is not always possible. Some things only sleep. Your wars unearthed pieces of us, relics scattered across your world. The warplane was chosen as camouflage, a grave marker your kind would never question. James's knees felt weak. He steadied himself against the wall. "Those machines, they're waking. They're killing my people." The Sentinel's gaze sharpened, gold light burning brighter. "Because containment has failed. The Watchers, your human overseers, tampered with the systems. They sought to control what cannot be controlled. Now balance must be restored." A tremor rattled the chamber, distant but violent. Explosions echoed from the tunnel they had escaped. The war above was still raging. James swallowed. Then what happens now? The Sentinel stepped closer, towering, but its voice softened. "Choice. You stumbled into a burden not meant for you. But sometimes fate chooses those who are not ready. You carry the blood of a soldier. You understand loyalty, sacrifice, and your companion..." It looked down at Max. "Your companion has the instincts of guardianship stronger than most of your kind." Max gave a small bark as if answering. The Sentinel extended a hand, not threatening but offering. "Join me. Help seal what has been broken. Without your help, this world will drown in the war we left unfinished." James's breath caught. His whole life he'd been forgotten, left behind drifting with nothing but Max for company. And now here was something beyond comprehension, asking him to matter again, to fight not for a flag or a country, but for the world itself. He looked down at Max, whose steady brown eyes met his. There was no fear in them, only trust. James exhaled slowly. "All right, tell me what I need to do." The sentinel's golden eyes flared brighter than before. "Then stand ready, soldier. The battle begins anew." The chamber walls vibrated. The pod behind them disintegrated into light, streams of energy wrapping around the sentinel's armor, reshaping it, amplifying its presence until it glowed like a living weapon. And then, without warning, the ceiling above cracked. Debris rained down. Machines poured into the chamber, red eyes burning, weapons raised. The sentinel raised its arm, unleashing a wave of golden energy that blasted the first wave into molten shards. But more came, endless, unstoppable. James tightened his grip on a fallen soldier's rifle, cocked it, and stepped forward beside the sentinel. Max growled low, then lunged, ready to fight at his master's side. The sentinel turned to James, a faint trace of something almost human in its expression. "Then let history remember you not as obsolete, but as the man who chose to stand." The machines roared. The chamber exploded into fire and steel. And James, forgotten veteran, drifter, nobody, became the unlikely warrior who stood at the edge of mankind's greatest secret.